Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining today's live SBA web conference. Before we begin, please ensure you've logged into the WebEx event and open the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, and these will be addressed during Q&A. To submit a question, please select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the message box provided, and press send. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. With that, I turn the conference over to Chris Eischen. Please go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Helen. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third session of SBA's first Wednesday webinar series for fiscal year 2020. For today's session, we'll be focusing on the pre-award side of subcontracting plans. And by the end of the program, you should have a better understanding of this topic as well as the resources available to you. If you are new to our event, this is a webinar series that focuses on getting subject matter experts on specific small business topics, such as subcontracting plans, and having them provide you with valuable information you can use in the performance of your job. We appreciate you taking this time to participate in the program for FY20, and we hope that you benefit from today's session. On to slide 3. As Helen mentioned, I am Chris Eischen, and I work as a Procurement Center Representative, or otherwise known as PCR, and I'm located in Kansas City, Missouri. Additionally, Ms. Gwen Davis, who is the PCR in Minneapolis, Minnesota, will be reading your questions submitted during the program for our speaker to address at the end of today's session. We both work in Government Contracting Area 4, and slide 3 includes our information. On to slide 4. Please note that all lines are on mute. However, you may submit questions or technical issues in the chat box on your screen. Your questions may be submitted anytime during today's session by entering them into the chat box, and these questions will be addressed at the end of our speaker's presentation. To make sure your question doesn't get overlooked, please ensure it is addressed to all panelists on the drop-down menu and not just to one individual. As most of you know, we have transitioned to WebEx and have been informed that some users may experience issues such as a blocked website or other error messages when attempting to access the conference login from their computer. If you are affected by this issue, please make sure you dial in and follow along with the slides provided in this email. We will ensure the page numbers are clearly stated so you can follow along. Now, if you are having any other technical issues, please call the AT&T support desk at the following number. That number is 301-250-7202. This telephone number is also included in the email invitation for today's program and on slide 4 of the PowerPoint presentation. For more SBA Small Business Program training and additional resources, please visit the SBA Learning Center at www.sba.gov. On to slide 5. Did you know the Association of Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, or APTAC, hosts a website where they post the first Wednesday programs? Since these sessions are recorded, you can re-listen to this program as well as previous sessions by visiting their website, which is provided here on slide 5. Additionally, Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, or PTACs, are a great resource, and partnering with your local PTAC for an industry day, sharing RFI notices or a source of sought announcement, or simply referring small business concerns to a PTAC are just a few reasons why they are such a useful resource for acquisition personnel. Please contact your local PTAC for additional information. Slide 6 is the program schedule for fiscal year 2020, and today's session on subcontracting plans is the third topic in the series for this fiscal year. You will see that we have added some new topics to our program list and improved on other topics that have been presented in the past. The participation continues to grow each month, and the positive word of mouth is greatly appreciated, so thank you for that. On to slide 7. I'm sure many of you will want to receive credit for today's training, so you'll be glad to know that today's session is worth 1 CLP. On the following slide, which is slide 8, you will find the training certificate, and I will go over the instructions when we get there. Now, several of you may have received the information for this training from a friend or colleague, but if you want to receive an email directly from us notifying you of upcoming First Wednesday webinar events, just send us an email at SBA Learning, so that's SBALEARNING at SBA.gov. In the subject line, please enter the words Add to List, and we'll ensure you're added to the distribution list. Now on to slide 8. As I mentioned, this is the certificate. First, you'll need to access the PowerPoint presentation that was emailed to you. Then you will manually fill in your name where it states insert your name here. Next, within the print settings, you will select Print Current Slide, which will allow for only the certificate to be printed. Once this is done, you can coordinate the CLP achievement through your training program. And another reminder, please note that SBA does not track your CLPs or communicate with your training program coordinator regarding your CLP achievements. On to slide 9. Today's training program has been assembled to address the pre-award side of subcontracting plans, as well as provide you with the additional resources available for your use. Our speaker has graciously accepted our invitation, and she will be directing me to continue on to the next slide. As mentioned earlier, if you are unable to access WebEx, please follow along with the PowerPoint presentation that was included in the email for today's training. We will identify the page number so you can follow along. Also, please note that some viewers may experience a delay as the slide changes on your screen. Now, I am pleased to introduce today's speaker to you, Ms. Valerie Coleman, who is the Prime Contracts Program Manager Guru for SBA's Office of Government Contracting. Val, we appreciate that you could meet with us today, and I'll turn the program over to you now.
Thanks, Chris. Well, good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're located, and I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving and you're going to have a wonderful holiday season. So we're going to be talking about subcontracting plans pre-award only. So nothing after award, which includes ESRS reporting, modifications, et cetera. So if you do have a question that you need to ask that has to do with post-award, please send an email to sbalearning@sba.gov, and I will forward that question to the appropriate person to answer your question. So on slide 10, you will see a goal without a plan is just a wish. And so I want to thank and give credit to Stephanie Lewis, who is the Deputy Area Director for the Office of Government Contracting with SBA Area 5 in Fort Worth, for the below quote, and also a few of the slides from a presentation that we gave together a couple of years ago. Next slide. We will be on 11. So let's start with some basics. When I do training, I always like to start at the pre-K or kindergarten level and bring you all up through elementary school, junior high, high school, and then graduate school, because it doesn't do any good to start you at graduate school if you haven't learned to read or write. So let's start with the basics of subcontracting, and the basics are in FAR Part 19.7 that talks about the subcontracting program. The basics of subcontracting are that only other than small businesses do subcontracting plans. And the reason we say other than small rather than large is because other than small also includes nonprofits and universities. So please be aware that if you are awarding any contracts to nonprofits, that they must be submitting a subcontracting plan if they meet the remainder of the criteria that we'll be talking about. And part of that is any contract or modification over $700,000 or $1.5 million for construction that is required that a subcontracting plan be submitted. It's also required that if a other than small business prime is only going to subcontract work to another other than small business, they still have to do a small business subcontracting plan. So it doesn't matter who they subcontract to. If they do subcontracting at all, a plan has to be in effect. We're going to go over FAR 52.219.9, which is the Small Business Subcontracting Plan Clause, and it has been updated, so you will have the August 2018 edition that's in the FAR right now. And we want to give maximum practicable opportunity to small businesses, and that includes the women-owned small business, small disadvantaged business, HUBZone certified firms, veteran-owned small business, and service-disabled veteran-owned small business. So while we're talking about this slide, and we're still on 11, when we talk about maximum practicable opportunity, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about a prime that might break out contract work into feasible units to facilitate small business participation. They conduct market research to identify small business subcontractors. They solicit small business concerns as early in the acquisition process as practical to allow them time to submit a timely offer for a subcontract. It might also provide, they may also, provide interested small businesses with adequate and timely information about the plans, the specs, and the requirements for performance of the prime contract to assist them in submitting a timely offer for a subcontract. Along with that, they could assist interested small businesses in giving them assistance in obtaining bonding or lines of credit, insurance, providing necessary equipment, supplies, materials, or services. They might utilize the available services of small business associations to find other small businesses. And they might also participate in a formal mentor-protege program. So these are all ways that other than small business, could give maximum practicable opportunity. Next slide, we will be on 12. So who doesn't have to submit a plan? Well, small businesses, of course. On the next one says no subcontracting opportunities exist. So we want to make a little caveat on this to let you know it's not the contracting officer or the agency that makes that determination that no subcontracting opportunities exist. What it requires is for the prime contractor to submit documentation into the contracting officer that states that they will not be subcontracting out any work and will be doing it 100% in-house. If that's the case, the contracting officer can get it approved one level above him or her and then place the document in the contract file. But they do need to be aware that even though they've said no opportunities exist, if they subcontract out even $1, that will require that prime to submit a subcontracting plan into the contracting officer for approval. And the subcontracting plan is not required when it's performed exclusively outside of the United States. I was a PCR for 16 years before getting my current position, and so I was working with an agency that had work that they did in the United States and also outside of the United States over in Asia and Europe. And so what we did on that plan was all of the work that was done outside the United States was taking off of the plan so we could compare apples to apples, and they did a subcontracting plan for the work that was just performed inside the United States. Next slide, which will be 13. So there are basically 3 different types of plans, and then DOD has their own. So over the next few slides, we're going to be talking about commercial plans, master subcontracting plans, individual subcontracting plans, and then the DOD comprehensive plan so that you'll kind of be more familiar with them if you're not already when you see one. Next slide, number 14. So let's start with a commercial plan. So the commercial plan is, of course, the preferred type for commercial items, and your definition for a commercial item is in FAR Part 2.101. It's based on the contractor's fiscal year, which is different than the DOD comprehensive plan, which is based on the government's fiscal year. So you need to make sure that you have the correct plan and have the correct fiscal year that you're looking at. So the commercial plan, again, is on the contractor's fiscal year. It applies to the entire production of commercial items. This could be on a corporate or plant basis or division or a product line. So you could have a company, which I did at one time, have 3 separate divisions, and each division had their own commercial plan. They then decided that that was too much of a hassle, and they combined them all into one, which was great. But normally when you get a commercial plan, at the top, the prime will tell you that it covers the following, maybe affiliates or subsidiaries, or it covers their entire operation. The commercial plan also covers all subcontracting, whether it's government or commercial. So when you see a commercial plan, you're going to notice that the goals are much smaller than you would see in an individual plan, but the dollar volume is much higher. It does require all the required elements that are in FAR 19.704, and you will see 19.704 on the following slides. It remains in effect during the contractor's fiscal year for all federal government contracts in effect during that period. So basically, the prime contractor submits one commercial plan that gets approved, and that is accepted by all of the federal government for any contracts that are awarded under that particular corporate or corporation, plant, division, or product line for the remainder of that contractor's fiscal year. Next slide. We are on 15. The next is a master plan. I only saw one or two of those in my 16 years as a PCR, but that's on a plant or a division basis. And basically what a master plan is it's a template, or it's the boilerplate of a subcontractor plan with all of the required elements, and it's effective for 3 years after approved. So the only thing that's not in the boilerplate are the goals, and that's because the goals are negotiated for each contract that company may be awarded, and then the master plan and the goals are kind of merged or married together and become an individual plan that's for the life of that contract. Next slide, 16. The individual subcontracting plan, I think, is the one that most of us see all the time. It's for a specific contract, so you have one contract, you have one plan. A little bit of difference on this one. It does cover the entire contract period, which includes the option years. And so if you have a base contract plus 4 option years, you will have 5 sets of goals. And the reason for that is, as we know, option years don't have to be exercised by the government. There could be poor performance, or maybe the work is no longer needed or funding ran out. So you don't want to penalize a company for a 5-year subcontracting plan when we're on, in this case, as my example shows, a year-to-year basis. So you would only be, the prime would only be obligated for the base year, and then when you exercise the option year, then the first option year would be added into the base. So there must be separate goals for each of the option periods. And as you've seen on the previous slides, it does contain all of the required elements. Next slide. 17 is the comprehensive subcontracting plan for DoD contracts. I'm going to be honest here and say that in my years as a PCR, I never dealt with any DoD comprehensive subcontracting plans, but the information, if you do need it, is in the DFARS 219.702. It's an annual plan that involves all DoD subcontracting, and as you can see here, it's based on the government's fiscal year. On a corporate plant basis, DCMA, Defense Contract Management Agency, administers the program. It does contain all of the elements, just like a master, a commercial, and an individual plan, and DoD may add some additional elements as each procurement center does the plan. So if you're involved in the DoD comprehensive subcontracting program, 219.702 in the DFARS is where you would go. Next slide, please. We're on 18. So who reviews plans? Well, of course, on individual and master plans, the contracting officer is going to look at it. And then per 19.705, they should be having their small business specialist and the procurement center review it. And as you can see, I took the exact quote from the FAR on the small business specialist and the PCR looking at it. While the small business specialist can recommend approval and things of that nature, the PCR is advisory comments only. We cannot dictate the dollar amount of subcontracting, the goal percentage, or anything else and say this is what it must be. So we would offer advisory comments only, basically based on the required elements that are in the plan and a few other things that we'll be talking about as we go along. On the commercial subcontracting plan, the first approval is by the contracting officer for the first federal contract that's awarded. It's still reviewed by the small business specialist and the PCR. And then subsequent approvals, the contracting officer, as you can read here, responsible for the uncompleted contract with the latest completion date is going to be looking at it. And the large prime would provide a copy of their approved plan to each of the contracting officers with each of the procurement centers that they're dealing with a contract on. The DoD comprehensive subcontracting plan is a little bit different in that it's negotiated with DCMA annually. Next slide. So you've heard a lot on the previous slides of FAR 19.704. So let's get into that part of the FAR and the subcontracting clause 52219-19. So the offeror's plan shall include, and I do not normally like to read slides, but I will on this one, separate goals expressed in terms of total dollars subcontracted that would include base and option years, and as a percentage of total plan subcontracting dollars for the use of small business, veteran-owned small business, service-disabled veteran-owned small business, hub-zone small business, small disadvantaged business, and woman-owned small business concerns as subcontractors. You will see that this is a little bit different than the prime in that there will be goals for veteran-owned small businesses, which we don't have in prime in this prime statutory goals. The option years are broken out separately, as I've already talked about. That's in FAR 52219-9C1. And on individual plans only, a contracting officer can also establish goals as a percentage of total contract value. And I'm going to give you an example of that as we get farther down into the slides. But a lot of times, I sat at Johnson Space Center in Houston, which is where I'm located, and every subcontracting plan actually had goals based on total contract value for award fee purposes and then subcontracting goals for reporting purposes and to be in compliance with the FAR. I do want to read one last line in the very first part of 19.704 and 52219-9, which says, failure to submit and negotiate the subcontracting plan shall make the offeror ineligible for award of a contract. So we need to get these plans approved and looked at so that they can be made a material part of the contract prior to award. Next slide, please. We're on slide 20. So the goals are a biggie in subcontracting plans, as you all know. So let's talk about them for a little bit about, are they acceptable? A lot of agencies will put in solicitations minimum goals or floors. I like to use the word floors because the goals, sometimes people say, well, I reached it and I don't have to do anything else after that because we met our goal. No, goal is the minimum you should have. We always want you to exceed that. You could also just do the plain statutory goals, 23% small business, 5% SDB, 5% women, 3% service-disabled vets, and 3% hub zone. We see that a lot. One of the things that you may not be aware of, however, is that your agency has subcontracting goals. Just like SBA negotiates prime goals with your agency, we also negotiate subcontracting goals. So you may see goals that may be higher or lower than the statutory goals based on what SBA has negotiated with your procurement center. And then, are the goals realistic? Well, when you just look at that and say realistic, your first question is, well, what does realistic mean? How do we determine if something is realistic when we're talking about things that we really can't control a whole lot? So let's go to the next slide, Chris, which is 21, and talk about realistic goals. So the first thing is they must be at a reasonable level. And what we mean is that the prime expended good faith efforts to the maximum practical extent possible to try to get work set aside for small businesses as a subcontractor. They shouldn't lowball the goals, which means to minimize exposure to liquidated damages. We don't want the prime doing that, or to avoid the administrative burden of substantiating good faith effort. They shouldn't negotiate upwards. That means if a higher goal will significantly increase the government's costs or seriously impede the attainment of acquisition objectives, we don't want to negotiate upward. The main thing you need to understand is there is no standard goal with a plan. Every plan is different, just like every acquisition is different, so there's going to be different goals. We always say that goals should be aggressive, but they should be attainable. And you must consider the circumstances. So when you're looking at the goals as a contracting officer or a small business specialist, consider some of these things when you're looking at the plan. The previous involvement of small business in similar acquisitions, the availability of small businesses in socioeconomic groups, past performance of contractors, reasonableness of the goals, and methods that the prime intends to use towards meeting the goal. And let me just give you an example of one of the ways that you really have to look at goals is I got a subcontracting plan, and I was told the work was basically the same thing. It was a follow-on contract, and what happened was they had in the plan that they had achieved a 10% WOSB goal for the past 5 years. And when I looked at the plan that they gave me for the follow-on, it only had a 5% goal. So my comments are advisory, but I asked, why is this goal half of what it was before if it's the same type of work? And I found out later when they went to look at it, because the small business specialist did not know either, when we went back and looked at it, it turned out that a large chunk of the work that this contractor had done for the past 5 years that was being done by a woman-owned small business had been taken out of the statement of work and put into another contract. If there had been an explanation concerning that in there, we wouldn't have had to go back. So look for explanations in your subcontracting plans when you get them if the goals seem off to you based on maybe trends that the prime has put in their plan. Next slide. So let's do a little test. This is actually a subcontracting plan goal statement that I got one time. And as you can see on here, the total subcontracting was $100,000, and they had work subcontracted to small business, STBs, 8A, women-owned, economically disadvantaged, women-owned, other, which we never found out what they thought was other, but they put that in there, HUB-zone, veteran-owned small business, and service-disabled veteran-owned small business. So we're going to go to the next slide to see how it should have been submitted. Slide 23. This is the correct method. 100%, the only time you're going to get 100% is when you add large business subcontracting and small business subcontracting. Those two numbers equal 100%. Then the small business was 30%, and you do the percentage based on the total subcontracting, not based on the small business subcontracting, which is what they did in the first example. So as you can see on here, each of the dollar amounts are exactly the same as the previous slide, but the percentages now are correct because they're based on total subcontracting dollars instead of just the small business dollars. Next slide, please, 24. So let's see if you can spot the other mistakes. I am leaving this slide is going to be the same all the way through the rest of for the next 4 slides, I guess, but we're going to show the mistakes that happen that a PCR will pick up on, a small business specialist will pick up on, and contracting officers should pick up on. So next slide to 25, please. So here's the first thing that catches when I would be reviewing plans that catches my eye. When I look over here and I see, first off, a hub zone goal and a service disabled vet goal above 3%. Now, there's nothing wrong with a 5% goal, but when I look at 5% and I look at women-owned and I look at SDB, it's obvious they raised the goals because they thought all of the goals had to add up to the 30% goal that was small business. And they're not supposed to add up. And the reason for that is just like in prime dollars, where if you have a woman-owned hub zone firm that's a small business, you count those dollars in small business and woman-owned and hub zone. A prime contractor can do the same thing on a subcontract, where if they have a woman-owned hub zone small business, they get to count, of course, the dollars in small business, but then they also get to count it in hub zone and woman. So that is why your socioeconomic categories, your percentage and dollar are never, well, your percentage is never going to add up to your small business percentage. Let's see if we can spot some more errors on this. Next slide, 26. All right, so now we've got veteran-owned small business, which has to have a separate goal, and service-disabled vets. All service-disabled vets are also vets. So the veteran goal and percentage, if it's not equal to allow veterans who are not service-connected to get subcontracts, it should always be higher than the service-disabled vet goal. So that's an obvious error right there. So I would be making an advisory comment that that is incorrect and it should be corrected. Let's go to slide 27, Chris. Here's another one. We see this all the time. Folks, I hate to tell you this, but zero's not a goal. And so if you do see a zero in there, there should be an explanation from the prime contractor on why it's zero. And a lot of times they can't explain it. I've seen a lot of plans that had zeros for everything except SDB. And they gave a very good explanation. There was only one thing they subcontracted out, and it went to an SDB, and they were not anything else. They were just a small business and disadvantaged. And so they explained that. So just be aware that these are some of the mistakes that we see when we get plans in, not so much from your seasoned primes, but a small business who's become a other than small or a prime who's never submitted a plan. You'll need to maybe handhold them a little bit to help them understand about how to do their goals. Next slide. So the first thing I want to say is I know you wouldn't have done a plan on a $300,000 contract, but I didn't want to get too big on numbers, so I know you wouldn't have done this except on $700,000, but I did it on $300,000 just to make it a little easier on me to be putting these numbers down. So that's my caveat on this slide. One of the things that happens is for those agencies that require total contract value and subcontracted value, this is kind of the way the chart would look. If you look over on the left, the dollar amount is going to stay the same. You've got all your categories there. So on your subcontracted value, you see it equals 100%, and that then you have your socioeconomic categories, and that percentage is based on the $100,000, which is the total subcontracted value. But this agency wanted it on total contract value also. So the 23% is, for a large business, is 23% of the total contract value. So it only comes up to 33%, and then you can see the difference in the total contract value percentages. Again, the dollar amount stays the same. The percentage changes based on whether it's on subcontracted value or total contract value. So you can see there's a huge difference in the percentage on that. Next slide, please. So we keep on talking, we're on slide 29, about subcontracts. So what is a subcontract, basically? This is the definition from the FAR. Any agreement entered into by a federal government prime contractor or subcontractor calling for supplies or services required for performance of the contract or subcontract. Next slide, slide 30. So let's get into the elements. So we did have 11, and then it got increased to 15. So let's start off. Total dollars to be subcontracted. You must have separate goals expressed in terms of total dollars to be subcontracted to small businesses, veteran-owned small businesses, service-connected disabled veteran-owned small businesses, hub zone STBs, and women-owned small businesses. The next one is the types of supplies and services to be subcontracted and identification of the types planned for each of the socioeconomic groups that I just talked about. So what's excluded from subcontracting? I'm not going to read these because you all can see them, but it's basically if you see a plan, and a lot of times they will list the name of the company, and they will list what that company is going to be doing for them as a subcontract. If you see any of these that are listed, those should be excluded from subcontracting. And so if you go back to them and they are excluded, that's going to change up your percentage of what you're doing with them. So just be aware that there are exclusions from subcontracting that are per the FAR. Next slide, 31. So then there has to be a method that the prime used to develop the goals. What did they look at? They could have listed on there that they had past history, they had input from small businesses when they were preparing the proposal. They could have an internal listing of small businesses. That's how they looked at the goals and what they could actually subcontract out. Then the method they used to identify potential sources. It could be trade fairs, industry days. They could have gone into SAM. They could have gone into the Dynamic Small Business Search. They could have gone to resource organizations like veterans or minority organizations to find potential sources. Third is whether indirect costs were included or not included. On individual plans, most of the time indirect costs are not included. On commercial plans, they will be, so just be aware of which plan you're looking at. The name of the individual administering the plan and his description of their duties, that's very important because you could be, and I'll use Houston since I'm here, you could have Johnson Space Center award a contract to someone in Houston for work in New Mexico and the administrator of the plans in California. So you need to be aware of who's administering the plans. It's not always the local person where your agency is located or where the company that's doing the work is located. There could be different divisions that handle different things. So be aware of where the person administering the plan is located because you're going to be in contact with them a lot on the post-award. The efforts to ensure small businesses have equitable opportunity to compete, which could be, we don't use the term set-asides when we're talking about subcontract. We could talk about, they're called managed procurements. So that could be that, let's say, a Boeing decided they have engineering services and they want to set it aside just for hub zone firms to compete as a subcontractor. So you want to make sure that they have in there what they're doing, that small businesses have an equitable opportunity, that nothing is too hard for them to obtain, blueprints, things of that nature. You want to make sure that one of the elements in there is that the required clauses and provisions will flow down to the subs. Anything that goes to other than small business over $700,000 or 1.5 in construction, that subcontractor has to then submit a plan back to the prime, and that will continue until it flows down to a small business or it's less than $700,000 or 1.5 million in construction. So you could actually have several tiers of this flowing down. Assurances that the reporting will be done, and that, of course, is post-award, that record-keeping procedures are available, and how they're going to keep the records. And then these are the 4 new ones that were added that we need to make sure. A lot of people, especially seasoned primes, they're used to the 11. They forget about these other 4 to make 15. So please make sure when you're reviewing a plan that these 4 are in there. And that's, as you can see, that a good faith effort will be made to utilize those small businesses that a prime used to prepare the proposal or bid. And the next one is an explanation to the contracting officer if those small businesses not used, that needs to be the contracting officer within 30 days after the end of the contract. Assurances that that a prime will not prohibit a small business from discussing payment with the contracting officer, and also assurances that the small business will be paid on time. I will like to mention that we get a lot of calls on this one about small businesses saying that a prime has not paid them. The fact that a prime has not been paid is not an excuse to not pay a small business sub. So we want to make sure that those 4 additional elements are listed in that subcontracting plan, and if they're not, it needs to go back to the prime contractor to be corrected. Next slide, slide 32. One of the things that we do is surveillance reviews, and I'm sure a lot of you have been involved in that. I have, as a program manager, I have oversight over the surveillance review program, and so I get to see every report that comes in. So I wanted to list some things that on the pre-award side that we're not seeing. As a PCR for my 16 years, I was on 37 surveillance reviews, and every single one of them had problems with subcontracting. And I would say almost 100% over the last 3 years I've had this position, subcontracting is still a problem. And the main things wrong is that a plan was not made a material part of the contract and therefore is not in the file. If it's a commercial plan, there is no indication that the contracting officer has a copy of it. The goals were not figured correctly, and so that kind of messed up the whole plan because it was not figured correctly. It was done after the award, which, as I read earlier, it's supposed to be done prior to award. And this one's kind of on the border, but I wanted to put it in because it's a biggie, because I'm not getting into post-award like reports and things of that nature. The plan was not sent to SBA, and there's the FAR reference that says the plan, approved plan, is to be sent to SBA for our commercial market reps. Next slide, please, 33. If you need additional assistance on pre-award, you can always contact your local PCR. There's the reference right there for where they're located. That you can also ask for some additional training if you need that to go in, and maybe those individuals that are not on this call, but you think they might get some benefit of learning more about pre-award subcontracting plans, we'd be more than happy to come in and do that training for you also. And I believe, next slide, that we are at the end of subcontracting plans pre-award. Again, please remember, if you're submitting a question, that we are doing questions on pre-award only, and if you do have a post-award, please send it to SBA Learning at sba.gov, and we will send it to the appropriate individuals to get you an answer. So, Chris, Gwen, I will turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Val. Gwen, if you are ready, let's start with the questions.
Okay. First question is, this person used to see goals primarily for supporting services, such as janitorial. Is this still the case? Or are more of the goals in the subcontracting plans for substantial items like production of product?
It depends on what type of plan you have. If you're doing a commercial plan, anything that prime does whether it's supplies, service, manufacturing, whatever, they get to count whether it's on a government or a commercial basis. If it's an individual contract, we're seeing all sorts of things, engineering services, manufacturing, IT, and then your basic services like janitorial or grass cutting, you know, all of those kind of things. There's no limit to what can be subcontracted out. You know, a prime can't do it all, so anything that they want to subcontract out, they have the ability to do that. So that makes a difference on their goals, of course, and the percentage when you review it.
Okay, next question is on slide 18. For commercial subcontracting plans for schedule contracts, or like Schedule 70 or consolidated schedule, do the small business specialist and PCR need to review plans for subsequent annual approvals, like annual approvals after the initial first-year plan?
The plans that are off of GSA schedules and stuff, GSA approves the plans. So the GSA contracting officers will take care of approval of those plans.
Okay, next question. What do you recommend for design-build contracts where the contract is awarded prior to the scope being fully defined, but we have to approve the subcontracting plan in order to award the contract? There's significant guesswork with no recourse to raise them once the build portion gets fleshed out.
This is bordering on a post-award, but there can be, you know, if you do a modification to the contract because additional work's been added over the $700,000 or $1.5 million, you know, you're going to adjust your goals. It's just kind of like when you get an IDIQ contract, you have to base the plan on the total amount, let's say not to exceed $50 million. You have to make it on the $50 million, but then your reporting is done on what you actually have gotten to date. So that's why it's important on your reports that you do them correctly. And didn't mean to get into post-award, but yeah, those are the kind of things that can be adjusted because some of them are variables. You're just not going to know, and it's almost like a guesstimate. You can do the best guess. A lot of primes, once they actually submit the plan, they get it approved, and then they find out the scope of work is different or has changed, they have gone in and modified the subcontracting plan to fit more with what the actual scope is.
Okay, is there a repository for commercial plans, and how does the contracting office know if a commercial plan has already been approved, and how do they get a copy of it?
Well, you ask the prime if they have a commercial plan. I will tell you, most prime contractors that I know of, because they don't want to do plans all the time, if they have a commercial plan, they're going to let you know that they've got a commercial plan and it's already been approved, and all you do is you ask them for it. If they can't produce a commercial plan and they say one's been approved, I would then say, give me the name of the contracting officer that approved the plan so I can get it. There's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't have a copy of it, though.
Okay. Can you explain the quick definition between the subcontracting plan, when the subcontracting plan is required, and a small business participation plan?
Subcontracting plan is, as we said, required when there are subcontracting opportunities and it's over $700,000 or over $1.5 million if it's in construction. A participation plan is basically when a procurement center wants to be able to count dollars in a different way than a subcontracting plan does. And I will be very honest with you. I will give you a better answer to that if you send me the question, because in my entire career with SBA as a PCR, I never had to deal with participation plans whatsoever. But I will get you an answer from our legal staff or someone that can give you a side-by-side difference between the two.
Okay, slide 32. If a subcontracting plan is required, is it mandatory for the contracting officer to incorporate the approved plan into the contract award And if so, how do you make the plan a material part of the contract? Do you simply make it as an attachment?
Yeah, you can just make it an attachment. It is in the FAR that it says it will be made a part of the resultant contract. So it is in the FAR that you must put it in there. Most of the time, it's in there as an attachment.
Okay. Next question. How is a good faith effort measured? What is the recourse when a large prime uses a small business by name and their pricing and preparing the proposal, but when the contract is awarded, the prime does not use the small business it used in preparing the proposal?
Post-award question, please send that to the inbox.
Okay. Contractor generates one plan for the fiscal year. Doesn't the FAR require updates on an annual basis?
If it's a commercial plan, it does have to be updated every year, yes. The individual plan is for the length of the contract, no matter how long it is. The master plan is approved for 3 years, but the commercial plan is on a year-to-year basis.
Okay. Well, individual subcontracting plan is most used. For commercial services, should we use the commercial plan? In other words, the individual subcontracting plan should only be used for non-commercial contracts?
If the item meets the definition of a commercial, it says it's the preferred way. It doesn't say you must do it that way. It says it's the preferred way. And so a lot of primes that I worked with, because I'm here in Houston, so I have a lot of oil and gas companies. I had a company that did almost $60 million a year with small business, but they did an individual plan because they only had a few contracts with, well, they had about 5 or 6 contracts with the federal government, but there were very few subcontracting opportunities. When you're dealing with the oil and gas industry, there may be some additives, there may be some trucking, but other than that, that's all that can be subcontracted. So they may have only gotten credit to show that they subcontracted out maybe $2 or $3 million instead of the $60 million. They decided to go with a commercial plan so that they could get credit for the full $60 million, where their goals were smaller but the dollar volume was higher. So if it's a commercial item, the government prefers that they use a plan, but we're not going to force them to do a commercial plan if they want to do an individual one.
Okay. In regards to counting subcontracting dollars, if a contract is awarded to a woman-owned company located in a hub zone, will that count towards both goals?
If they're hub zone certified. They have to be certified, not just located in a hub zone, but they have to receive the hub zone certification. So basically what a prime, just like the federal government, the prime's the same way. They'd love to have a service-connected disabled vet woman who got hub zone certified and self-certifies as an SDB. That way, that $50,000 or $100,000 that they awarded to them, they've got in a small business, and then they get to put it in each one of the other social economic categories. That's why you're never going to add up. That's why it doesn't add up.
Okay. Next question. Are any services contract that a prime contractor awards, is that fair game as part of subcontracting? So, for example, a subcontract to a surety or bonding company can be considered subcontracting.
Yeah, they're not doing it in-house. Well, if it's a construction company and they're getting bonds, if they're getting performance payment and bid bonds from a surety, that's not a subcontract. That's more of your general and administrative expenses that you have as a construction company that you have to deal with. But if they're doing, if they need plans made, if they have a courier service, they have to take them different places. If they have to go out and buy a different type of equipment to, an AutoCAD or something like that, those are all subcontracts.
Okay, and somebody chimed in regarding the small business participation plan. They said FAR Part 15 requires a small business participation plan as an evaluation factor in source selection not related to FAR Part 19.
Okay, there you got your answer. As I said, I've never dealt with participation plans at all.
Okay, for SBA surveillance purposes, what are the required signatures for an approved subcontracting plan incorporated into a contract? For example, PCR, PCO, SBS. Can the contracting officer and the small business specialist be sufficient?
No, a PCR under the FAR, you need to send a subcontracting plan to the PCR for advisory comments. I will just say that as a PCR, when I was doing it, I caught a lot of things that were not caught before. So, yeah, under the FAR, advisory comments come from the small business specialist and the PCR. The FAR is not written or, it says and. So for surveillance review purposes, we would look to see if a PCR was given the opportunity to review a plan, yes.
Okay, next question is on slide 30, this person can't find the subcontracting exclusions list in the FAR reference for FAR 19704A and 52219-9. Can you confirm that that's where that is, or is it someplace?
No, what I did on that, and I apologize if that was confusing, I gave you the elements. This is in a different part, and if they will send me a note, I will give them the FAR reference on where the exclusions are.
Okay. For a multiple award IDIQ, can some offers submit commercial plans and others submit individual plans?
If it's a commercial item, they can submit a commercial plan. But it's going to be on a year-to-year basis on what they're going to be doing. And they would have no idea how much they're going to get on an IDIQ. So they would, they would have to be basing it on that they were going to get $50 million in 1 year, and if it's a 10-year contract, I don't think they want to do that. So IDIQs are really made for individual plans.
Okay, and then somebody from GSA said that multiple award schedule subcontracting plans are reviewed at option, which is awarded, and then every 5 years after, assuming their contract is renewed for individual plans. Commercial plans from GSA on GSA schedule are reviewed annually.
Okay, so what most of the time on federal supply schedules, they do a 5-year base and like 3 5-year options. So if the base is 5 years, then even if they do an individual plan, it's good for 5 years. And then they would renew it because that's an option. So on commercial plans, yes, they do them every single year, but GSA approves them.
And that was the last question/comment that we had, Val.
Okay.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. If there are some additional questions, feel free to send those questions into sbalearning@sba.gov. If you do have any additional questions, please send the email to that address as well. Hope everybody has a great holiday coming up, and our next session will be the first one of 2020, and that will be on January 8th in regards to surveillance reviews, and hopefully you're getting used to Val's voice because you're going to hear that again next month. Val, once again, thanks for your great presentation and all your input, and thank you all, everyone, and we'll talk to you next year.
And that concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.